Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the book of Psalms. Today we'll be looking at Psalms 21 through 23. And we're going to start out with Psalm 21, which is a psalm of David in which he's expressing joy in the salvation of the Lord. David begins by telling us that God is the source of his strength and the foundation of his joy. He talks about God's faithful love and his mercy there in verse 7 when he says, "For the king trusteth in the Lord, and through the mercy of the Most High he shall not be moved." So he says that he trusts in God, and through God's mercy, he knows that he will be sustained, and he knows that God will take care of him. And then in verses 8 to 10, because David's enemies are also God's enemies, David knows that God is going to destroy them. So when we're closely united to God in a family relationship, as David was, our enemies are the same enemies as God's. So, and that's a big takeaway here. If God is our strength and our joy, and it's through him that every other part of our life is filtered, we know that God will always be with us and he'll be looking out for us. And that's something that we can really take to heart, that as long as we're focusing on God and as long as we're trying to live godly lives and focus on the Lord in all that we do, we know that God is going to be looking out for us and that God is going to be working things for us, so that we'll be working together instead of against each other. And then that brings us to Psalm 22. And now part of this may sound familiar because this is the psalm that Jesus cries out actually while he's on the cross. And we can't read it without thinking how completely its words are fulfilled in the suffering and the salvation of Christ. The psalmist feels abandoned there, abandoned by God, and as he calls out ceaselessly for help, there's no occasion in David's life that we can link very closely with this description, although he was often in danger and persecuted for long periods of time. Despite his pain, the psalmist still trusts in God. He doesn't curse God or deny him. He knows that the Lord is holy, righteous, and enthroned as king, and he recalls that God has rescued and delivers others in the past. Now, he says then that he describes himself as a worm, reduced and diminished, devoid of any sense of worth or significance. He's despised, mocked, insulted, yet he never sinks into self-pity, never blames himself for his fate, and he never seeks revenge. So many of these details only make sense when they are fulfilled in the crucifixion of Jesus. The behavior of the crowd, the blasphemous taunts about God's rescue, and if we remember the account of Christ on the cross, those things should all be clear to us. And he calls out for deliverance from the enemies which surround him. Remember, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus cried out. And he remembers God's lifelong care for him. Right from the moment that he was born, he lifts up his heart in hope and then suddenly makes a bold declaration. So this psalm here actually is kind of like it's a two-part psalm. So we have that psalm that the Lord is saying as he's on the cross, and David is kind of echoing these sentiments because David has been through a lot of these similar things. He's been through a lot of those same feelings as he's been running for his life for things that he really didn't deserve. He hadn't really done anything wrong early on he'd done anything wrong, but now he hasn't done anything wrong to deserve what's happening to him. And so we have this first half of that psalm where he's crying out and he's struggling with what he's going through. And then the second half of the psalm turns from pain and abandonment to praise and hope. He knows that he will live to celebrate God's deliverance, sharing a sacrificial meal of thanksgiving with the poor and the needy. So his good news will travel. And so all the families and the nations of the world will hear it, even the wealthy and self-sufficient, even the dying, even the countless generations yet to come will hear about this saving and put their trust in him. And that is a blessed promise that we see there. And then after that, we get to the 23rd Psalm. And this is a very short psalm. It's a very short psalm, and it's probably the most familiar in the entire Bible. And it speaks of God's love and his faithfulness in every circumstance of life, both now and in the future. And so it's I'll just read it because it's just 6 verses. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me besides the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest me my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that is a beautiful psalm, and it's no secret why it is probably the most well known in the entire Bible, the entire book of Psalms. And so we're invited to imagine this Eastern shepherd at work, okay? Because we're thinking of the Good Shepherd. Remember, David was a shepherd. That's where he got his beginning. And the Lord is our shepherd, and we are his sheep. So he is the leader. He's the provider and the protector of his flock. He knows every animal by name, and he values each one more than his own life. And as David was a shepherd boy, and Jesus describes himself as the Good Shepherd, these verses take us to the heart of what it means to really be loved by God. Walking ahead of his sheep and calling them to follow, the shepherd finds fresh pasture to graze and safe places to drink. Even when the flock has to squeeze through a narrow way, the valley of the shadow of death, okay, something that's sketchy, the sheep have nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear. The shepherd can haul them to safety with his staff, and that's the same way that God is there for us. He can get us through those difficult times. And even when we walk through the valley of the shadows of death, when we walk through the worst of times in our life, we know that our good shepherd is with us. And the shepherd tends his sheep in every way. He clears the pastures of stones and levels the potholes. That's what a good shepherd did then. And then stands guard while they eat. He checks their heads for sunburn, and he treats their wounds with soothing oil. The shepherd does everything to take care of his sheep. And we have a God that does those same things for us. And so that is a psalm that, if you're going to memorize anything in Psalms, you should really try to memorize that Psalm 23. I had it all memorized at one point. I have most of it memorized still, but it's just such a great psalm and such a great promise that God is our shepherd, and he loves us, and he's taking care of us, and we've got nothing to worry about because the good shepherd is on our side. So that's all from Psalms today. I'll see you tomorrow in the book of Job.